Welcome back to SugarBee. Today we're diving into one of the most powerful and overlooked stories from the Gilded Age, the Black experience during a time when America was changing faster than ever. From battles against racism in everyday life to stories of courage, ambition, and resilience, we'll uncover how characters like Peggy Scott shine a light on a truth that history often forgets. So, let's step back into the 1880s and explore a world where strength and determination shaped the future. The Gilded Age, stretching from the 1870s to the early 1900s, is often remembered as a glittering time in American history, a period where opulence reigned, fortunes were made overnight, and society seemed to dance on the edge of grandeur. Images of sprawling mansions, elaborate balls, and the unstoppable march of industrial progress often define this era. But beneath the shimmering surface lay a world of inequality and exclusion, especially for African Americans, while the elite flaunted their wealth and status in the grand avenues of New York and Newport. Black Americans were fighting a different battle, one for dignity, recognition, and the right to exist in spaces that were never designed for them. For many, the Gilded Age was not a golden chapter but a test of endurance in a society eager to push them to the margins. That it's against this backdrop that the Gilded Age series introduces us to storylines like Peggy Scott's, a young Black woman whose journey shines a light on the struggles and triumphs of her community. Actor Jordan Donica, who brings such power to the screen, explains that this story is different because it isn't subtextual. For once, the Black experience isn't hidden in whispers or brushed aside as background. It's front and center. As Donica puts it, the story is about us, what we look like, and where we come from, in a very real way. That honesty is striking, because historically, narratives about the Gilded Age have often excluded Black voices. While the wealthy socialites of the time, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Russells, dominated the headlines, Black Americans were carving out their own legacies in ways that history books often fail to mention. They were educators, writers, business owners, and professionals who defied the odds stacked against them. But their victories were hard-earned, constantly shadowed by a system designed to keep them in second place. The brilliance of the Gilded Age lies in showing both sides of the coin, the glittering wealth of high society and the invisible struggles of those who had to fight for recognition. By placing Peggy Scott and her family within the narrative, the series reminds us that history isn't just about those who sat in the grand drawing rooms, it's also about those who were forced to prove, day after day, that their voices mattered. In many ways, the show's choice to give this storyline prominence reflects a quiet revolution, just as Black Americans of the 19th century created their own revolutions in real life. They wrote novels, started newspapers, opened schools, and built businesses. They carved space for themselves in a society that sought to erase them, and through sheer resilience, they laid the groundwork for generations to come. So when Donica says the story is about identity and belonging, he's speaking to a larger truth. The Gilded Age was not just about fortunes and fancy gowns, it was also about the hidden battles waged by Black Americans who refused to be forgotten. This stage, unlike any other, gives their stories the spotlight they have always deserved. There is one character who captures both the beauty and the burden of the Black experience during the Gilded Age, it's Peggy Scott. From the moment she steps into the world of the Gilded Age, Peggy is more than just a secretary in the Van Ryn household. She's a young woman with extraordinary ambition, carrying not just her own dreams but the unspoken hopes of an entire community that rarely had the chance to see themselves represented in such spaces. The turning point in her journey comes when the editor of the Christian Recorder, one of the most influential African American publications of the time, offers to publish an excerpt from her novel. For Peggy, this is more than a personal triumph. It is a radical act of defiance against a world that had little interest in the voices of women, and even less in the voices of Black women. To be published at all was rare. To have a platform as a Black female writer in the late 19th century was monumental. Peggy's pen becomes her greatest weapon. Through her words, she pushes against the walls that society has built around her. Writing allows her to speak truths that polite society would rather keep buried. It's not just fiction she's crafting, it's a reflection of a reality that many in her community lived every day. Her stories serve as both a shield and a sword, protecting her dignity while challenging the prejudice and ignorance that sought to silence her. And what makes Peggy's recognition even more significant is the context of the time. The Gilded Age was dominated by voices that looked nothing like hers. Women, in general, were often confined to domestic roles, with their ideas dismissed as trivial. For Black women, the challenge was doubled. They faced both sexism and racism. In a society that tried to tell them they belonged nowhere near the pages of literature or the halls of influence. Yet here was Peggy, carving her place anyway. This victory, however, is not without its pressures. When the editor requests another chapter she hasn't written yet, Peggy is faced with the daunting task of balancing her professional aspirations with her personal struggles. It's a reminder of the weight carried by trailblazers, the expectation to not just succeed but to continue succeeding against all odds, all while knowing that any stumble might be used as an excuse to shut the door behind them. What makes Peggy's story so moving is how universal it feels, even today. She represents every person who has ever been told their voice doesn't matter, and proves them wrong with the sheer power of her words. Her determination is not only a personal triumph but also a symbolic victory for a generation of women who dared to dream beyond the limits placed on them. Peggy Scott may be a character in a television drama, but her story reflects countless real women whose names we may never know, yet whose courage continues to inspire. In choosing to highlight her journey, The Gilded Age reminds us that progress is not just measured in wealth or status, but in the voices that rise up when the world tells them to remain silent. A triumph, especially in a world as divided as the Gilded Age, rarely came without hardship. For Peggy Scott, the joy of being recognized as a writer and the pride of stepping into a professional role quickly collided with a painful reminder of the society she lived in. What started as a simple cold, the kind most people would dismiss as a minor inconvenience, soon turned into something more alarming. In the late 19th century, illnesses we now consider treatable could escalate into serious, even deadly, conditions. Without proper medical attention, what seemed small could become catastrophic in a matter of hours. As Peggy's condition worsened, the Van Ryn household, where she was working, moved quickly to summon medical help. Agnes Van Ryn, a woman of immense social standing, called upon her trusted doctor, confident that he would provide care. But what followed was a moment that would shock not only Agnes but the audience watching at home. The doctor refused to treat Peggy. His reason? She was Black. The refusal was a devastating blow. In an instant, the safety and stability Peggy had built in the Van Ryn home crumbled under the weight of systemic racism. For Agnes, it was an eye-opening moment. She had always considered herself a woman of decency and propriety, someone who offered Peggy a place of respect within her household. Yet, when faced with this act of blatant discrimination, Agnes realized her influence had limits. Her name, her reputation, even her wealth could not shield Peggy from the deep-seated prejudice that governed society. This was more than just a personal insult, it was a reminder of the fragility of Peggy's position. No matter how talented, intelligent, or well-connected she was, she remained vulnerable simply because of the color of her skin. The illness stripped away any illusions of security, leaving her exposed to the cruel realities faced by Black women. Every day, the scene is powerful because it doesn't just focus on Peggy's suffering, it also forces the audience to witness Agnes's stunned reaction. She is horrified that her own trusted physician, a man she had relied on for years, could show such cruelty. For perhaps the first time, she is confronted with the fact that her world, the polished, elegant world of old New York society, was built on unspoken rules that allowed such prejudice to flourish unchecked. Peggy's illness and the doctor's refusal also highlight the broader dangers faced by Black communities during the Gilded Age. Access to medical care was limited, and discrimination in healthcare was rampant. Many Black patients were denied treatment, forced to rely on underfunded hospitals or community healers, and often paid the ultimate price for that exclusion. The show captures this reality in a single, heartbreaking moment. One woman's illness becomes a window into the systemic injustices that shape daily life. What makes Peggy's situation even more poignant is the strength she displays in the face of it. Though vulnerable and gravely ill, she does not break. She remains a symbol of resilience, even as her body fights against both sickness and society's cruelty. And for Agnes, the moment is a turning point, a painful but necessary lesson that compassion and good intentions are not enough to dismantle prejudice. Through Peggy's illness, the Gilded Age reminds us that progress and privilege could not erase the harsh realities of racism. It forces us to see that vulnerability, even in the most respected homes, was a constant for Black women, who lived every day knowing that the world could turn against them in an instant. As Peggy's illness deepens, another layer of the Black experience during the Gilded Age comes sharply into focus: the burden carried by parents who dreamed of better lives for their children, only to watch society tear those dreams down. For Arthur Scott, Peggy's father, the situation is unbearable. He sacrificed everything to give his daughter an education, something few Black families in the 19th century could afford or access. Education, for him, was not just a privilege, it was a weapon against the injustice that surrounded them. It was the key that could open doors that society had long kept shut. But now, as he watches his daughter suffer in the Van Ryn household, living in the servants' quarters, denied proper medical treatment because of the color of her skin, Arthur's frustration boils over. It isn't just anger at the doctor's refusal or at Peggy's declining health. It's anger at a world that continuously tells Black families that no matter how hard they work, no matter how high they climb, they will never truly belong. Arthur's emotions are raw, and understandably so. He sent Peggy out into the world with the hope that her education and talent would shield her from some of the cruelty he had endured. Instead, he's forced to confront the painful reality that his daughter, despite her accomplishments, is still seen first and foremost as a Black woman in a society that refuses to acknowledge her worth. The education he fought for has given her tools, yes, but it has not given her immunity from prejudice yet. Within this tension between father and daughter lies something profoundly powerful. Peggy does not crumble under the weight of her father's disappointment or society's rejection. Instead, she remains steadfast. Even as her body weakens, her spirit stays strong. She listens to her father's anger with the quiet understanding of someone who knows the world all too well, and she holds firm to the life she envisions for herself, a life beyond the confines of what society says she is allowed to have. Her strength becomes a mirror for her father. Arthur sees in her the very resilience he hoped his sacrifices would instill. Though he feels powerless in the face of her suffering, Peggy proves that his sacrifices were not in vain. She embodies the very dream he has for her, to be a woman who refuses to accept the limits placed upon her, who insists on defining her own destiny even when the world tries to write her story for her. This chapter of Peggy's journey resonates with so many real stories from the Gilded Age. Black parents across the country were making extraordinary sacrifices for their children, sending them to schools, supporting them through new opportunities, and hoping against hope that the world would treat them better. More often than not, they were met with the same bitter truth Arthur faces, that society's prejudice could undo even the greatest of efforts. Still, just like Peggy, many of those children carried their parents' hopes into the future. They became writers, doctors, educators, and business leaders who pushed against the tide of discrimination. Peggy's story, though fictional, represents this reality, a daughter standing strong not only for herself but for the generation before her, proving that strength and determination could outlast even the harshest of setbacks. Through Arthur's anger and Peggy's resilience, the Gilded Age reminds us that progress was never just about individuals. It was about families, about the generations who poured their love, sacrifice, and faith into a future they might never see fully realized. And in Peggy, we see both the burden of that sacrifice and the unbreakable strength it creates. Peggy Scott's story may be set in the late 19th century, but the struggles she faces feel hauntingly familiar today. When we watch The Gilded Age and see a doctor refuse to treat her because of the color of her skin, it doesn't feel like a distant past, it feels like a mirror reflecting realities that persist in our own time. That's what makes this storyline so powerful. It's not just a history lesson. It's a wake-up call. Writers Sonia Warfield and historian Erica Armstrong Dunbar remind us that the discrimination Peggy experiences was not confined to the Gilded Age. Health disparities have long plagued communities of color, and they remain a painful truth even now. During Peggy's time, a cold could be life-threatening because access to timely, quality care was scarce for Black patients. Today, although medicine has advanced, barriers still exist. Studies consistently show that Black patients are less likely to receive adequate treatment for pain, less likely to be referred for life-saving procedures, and more likely to suffer from chronic conditions due to systemic inequalities in healthcare. Access. This connection between past and present is exactly why Peggy's story resonates so deeply. It forces us to ask, how much has really changed? We may no longer live in a world where doctors openly refuse to treat a patient because of their race, but implicit bias and structural inequality continue to create outcomes that echo that refusal. The show doesn't shy away from this reality, it leans into it, making Peggy's experience both a reflection of her time and a commentary on ours. Agnes Van Ryn's shock at the doctor's refusal is also striking. She believed her name, her wealth, and her social influence would protect Peggy. But as the scene demonstrates, no amount of privilege on Agnes's part could shield Peggy from the harshness of racism. In many ways, this is still true today. Black professionals often find that no matter how successful they are, they still face barriers and assumptions that their white counterparts may never encounter. The show uses Agnes's stunned reaction to remind viewers that good intentions, sympathy, or even allyship cannot erase the deep roots of systemic injustice. What makes The Gilded Age particularly impactful is its ability to humanize these issues. Instead of presenting statistics or policy debates, it gives us Peggy, a flesh-and-blood woman who coughs, suffers, and fears for her life while the system designed to care for her turns its back. It's in her vulnerability that we feel the true weight of inequality. Her struggle makes the issue impossible to ignore, even for viewers who may have never thought about healthcare disparities before. In this way, Peggy becomes more than just a character. She becomes a bridge between the past and the present, forcing us to reflect not just on how far we've come, but on how far we still have to go. The show's message is clear: The Gilded Age may be history, but the challenge is it reveals or not. Peggy's illness is more than a plotline, it's a call to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that echoes of the 19th century still shape lives today, and so, as we watch her struggle, we are left with a question that lingers long after the credits roll. Are we content with how far we've come, or are we ready to finish the fight Peggy's generation was forced to begin? After the heaviness of Peggy's illness and the blatant discrimination she endures, The Gilded Age offers a glimmer of hope in the form of Dr. William Kirkland. Unlike the doctor who refused Peggy treatment, Kirkland embodies a different story. One of inspiration, progress, and the undeniable power of representation. His character reminds us that even in a time of overwhelming prejudice, there were those who broke through barriers and proved that excellence could not be confined by race. For Dr. Kirkland, the turning point in his journey came when he learned about Arthur Scott, Peggy's father. Arthur was more than just a father fighting for his daughter's future, he was a successful Black businessman, a rarity in a society designed to hold men like him back. To Kirkland, this discovery was life-changing. It cracked open a world of possibility. If Arthur Scott could achieve this level of success, then perhaps the walls society had built around Black men were not as impenetrable as they seemed. Representation mattered then just as much as it does now. In an era where most people of color were systematically denied the chance to rise, the sight of someone like Arthur Scott running a business was revolutionary. It wasn't just about personal success, it was about rewriting the narrative. For young men like Kirkland, it was proof that they, too, could step into fields like medicine, law, or education, spaces that had long excluded them. Dr. Kirkland's admiration for Arthur Scott is also deeply symbolic. It illustrates how progress is often generational and communal. One man's achievements ripple outward, inspiring others to dream bigger and push harder. Arthur Scott didn't just provide for his daughter, he became a beacon for men like Kirkland who needed to see that greatness was possible, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Still, it's important to remember how rare such stories were during the Gilded Age. Black professionals made up only a small percentage of the population, and their paths were riddled with obstacles. Medical schools and universities often shut their doors to Black students, and even those who earned degrees struggled to find patients or positions in mainstream institutions. The few who did succeed carried an extraordinary burden. They weren't just working for themselves, but for their entire communities, proving with every step that Black excellence could not be denied. Kirkland embodies this truth. His presence In Peggy's life is more than just a personal connection, it's a reminder of the resilience and brilliance that existed within Black communities, despite relentless efforts to suppress them. He represents possibility, the idea that the future could look different, that Black professionals could thrive, and that the sacrifices of parents like Arthur Scott were not in vain. In highlighting Dr. Kirkland, The Gilded Age does more than introduce another character. It honors the real men and women of the 19th century who, though small in number, were mighty in their impact. They shattered ceilings, changed perceptions, and laid the groundwork for generations who would continue the fight for equality. Dr. Kirkland's story reminds us that hope often comes in the form of example. When one person dares to rise, they make it possible for countless others to believe they can do the same. And in the gilded world of wealth and privilege, his very existence is an act of quiet revolution. The Black professionals and intellectuals of the Gilded Age may have been few, but their impact was immeasurable. Figures like Peggy Scott, fictional though she may be, embody the courage and determination of countless real men and women who refuse to be forgotten. Their contributions remind us that even in an age of vast inequality, they carved out spaces of excellence, dignity, and hope. And while their stories were often left out of history books, the Gilded Age ensures their legacies live on. And that's the untold story of the Black experience during the Gilded Age, a story of resilience, defiance, and the relentless pursuit of dignity. What do you think of Peggy Scott's journey? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to SugarBee for more deep dives into the shows you love.